And now for our program, I'd like to invite Jim Barry, President of the Barry Corporation Company, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Past President Darren. It is my great pleasure today to introduce Dr. Ellen Censky, President and CEO of the Milwaukee Public Museum. A Cedarburg native, Ellen began her career at the Milwaukee Public Museum in 1977 and went on to serve in leadership capacities in other museums, including the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in Pittsburgh, where she first received national recognition for her work in founding and developing the BioBlitz Biodiversity Survey Program. Following successful 10 years of leadership across the country, Ellen returned to MPM in 2008 to serve as Senior Vice President and Academic Dean, a role in which she rebuilt the institution's research and curatorial departments and established academic partnerships with Wisconsin educational institutions. Since 2018, Ellen has served as the first female president and CEO in MPM's history, and in partnership with MPM leadership, partners, and supporters, continues to lead her team and community in the creation of a new natural history museum set to open in late 2026. This once-in-a-generation effort will be watched by museums around the country and the world. I have had the opportunity to work with Ellen in many different capacities with this project, and I can tell you that she is the embodiment of patience, tenacity, dedication, and focus on the ultimate objective, which is a new museum for Milwaukee that shall come to fruition soon. Let's give a warm Rotary welcome to Dr. Ellen Censky.
Thank you so much, Jim. And thank you for inviting me here to share a little bit about the museum. I hope that you have been following us for the past couple of years. And if you have, then you know that about in July of last year, almost a year ago, we revealed the conceptual plan for the new museum, which you see here, so for the new building. And then over the past couple of months, we have been doing the reveal of our exhibit galleries, with the latest one being revealed just today, and that was our rainforest and our butterfly vivarium. And so you might think that's what I'm going to talk about today, but I am not. I, in fact, am going to send you to our website to get any information on the gallery reveals that you might have. We have videos, we have renderings, we have lots of descriptions of what we'll be doing. But what I'm going to talk about today is actually the process to build a new museum, because this is a question that I get asked all the time. What does it take to build a museum? You can't get this on our website, so you're getting it firsthand from me. So I just want to remind you that building a museum building is unlike building any other kind of building in this city. But I want to bring you back to why we're building a museum. And it's not because we really want something new and shiny. It's because the building that we're in right now is owned by the county, and it has $100 million in deferred maintenance. It is not going to take us into the future. So in 2015 and 2016, we actually commissioned 2 different studies to see if we could repair this building, if we could maybe move the collections out of the basement and up to the exhibit floors. So we did in-depth studies, and it turns out that building a museum is actually cheaper than repairing the building that we're in. And we also know that the county doesn't have the funds to repair this building, nor are there donors who are going to put money into a county facility. So we headed off into the new museum process. So the first step in that process is to actually create a vision and a statement of purpose or to create the building blocks for that. And those are actually the things that guide forward. That vision and building blocks guide us in every step of the way, in architecture, in exhibit planning, in all of the programming that we'll do. So for that vision, we look to our collections. They had to be the inspiration for that new building and the new vision. Those collections are 3 million natural history items, from birds to mammals to insects, and another 1 million cultural items. And so we said, what can we do better than any other institution in this community or in this state? And that is to actually tell the stories that marry those kinds of collections, to tell the stories that are at the intersection of nature and culture. So once we had that vision, then we said we wanted to bring the community together. And we wanted to do this every single step of the way, is to engage with the community and get feedback so that the community is helping us to design and build this building. So we brought together a group of leaders, of business people, of educators, scientists, artists, visionaries, and we said, what are the building blocks? What are the things that should guide us forward? And that group of people helped us to come up with 5 building blocks. So we want to use the past to inform the present so that we can talk about the future. So we don't want to just talk about the past. Turning the museum inside out is really about acknowledging that we are a research institution. We have 4 million objects, less than 90%, probably about 8% of the collections are on display. The other collections are used for research not only by our staff, but also by our adjuncts and by people from around the world. So we wanted to make that much more obvious in this new museum. Teachers told us they want kids learning science by actually doing science, so we are committed to that. We heard loud and clear from this community that we don't want a museum filled with touchscreens. We want an immersive experience that transports you to another place and time. So that is a commitment in that new museum. And relevancy is in 2 different ways relevant. One is we are building a museum that will allow us to more easily change out collections and exhibits so that we can remain relevant. And the second is that we have said that we want to tell the stories from the voices of the people and the cultures that experience those voices. So these are our 5 building blocks. So we've started into that process. At the same time, we started into looking for a site for that museum. And it might seem simple that you just find a site that's available and you purchase it. But again, we are a museum that has collections. So we have to take into account the collections and what their needs are. So we had conditions in addition to just finding a site. We could not choose a site that was in a floodplain. We couldn't choose a site that was near a railroad track because the vibrations from railroads can actually shake collections and damage them. We also knew that we needed a site that was at least 2 acres in size. And we really wanted to stay west of the river because we have been west of the river for our entire history. For 140 years, we've been west of the river. Our first site was on a building that's now on the campus of MSOE. Then we were in a building that was where the Miller Highlight Theater is. Then when the library was built, it was actually built as a museum and library. And then we moved into the building that we're in now. So we really wanted to remain west of the river if possible. So we chose to, we looked at about 100 different sites, and we finally found the perfect site. And that site is in the lower right-hand corner of this. That is a site on Sixth and McKinley It was a site that was owned by 3 different property owners. So we began negotiations with those property owners, and in early 2021, we were able to purchase that site. So we had our vision, we had our site, but we actually also at the same time started considering what it would take to move 4 million objects. So what do we have? We have 900,000 insects. We have 800,000 vertebrates. We have 800,000 fossils, 300,000 plants, 220,000 cultural objects that come from across the world, 500,000 ancient history items. That's pots and lots of pot shards. And we have 280,000 history objects. That's everything from clothing to furniture to toys to decorative arts, typewriters, bicycles. I like to say, picture it as your grandmother's attic on steroids. So these are all, what we have to move is insects on pins, specimens in alcohol, metal objects, wooden objects, objects with feathers, fragile objects, heavy objects, tiny objects, elephants, lions, bears. Oh my. No, not only do we have to move these objects, but we actually have to do a lot more than just move them. We have to take into account that every one of these needs to be inventoried and assessed for packing. We cannot move them and have them damaged in that move. And we all know we've moved homes and something always ends up broken. We can't do that because these are irreplaceable. We also need to barcode everything, to crate it, to move it, and then to unpack it. But we can't pack, some of the things we can't do, we can't pack some items with other items because they'll off-guess. We can't, and they could cause damage. We cannot pack some items early because they need air circulation. We can pack some items and leave them packed up for a while, but then we need to have places to store all of those crates. We need to move hundreds of crates out of the building and into a new building, and we need to be able to stage them. We have one freight elevator. We need to move hundreds of items with one freight elevator. That, frankly, is old. Hopefully, it lasts through this move. We cannot move a certain amount above a certain value. We cannot have a certain value in the truck at one time. We cannot have a certain value on the roads at one time because of insurance. We cannot, thank God we're not crossing a bridge because we can't have 2 trucks on a bridge at one time. So finally, we have to find offsite storage and secure that. And we don't want to do that too early because then that offsite storage sits empty as we are packing and getting ready to move. So we have to time that out. So there is a huge amount of planning that is taking place and will continue to take place. And in the end, we figured that it would be about 8 years to move all of these objects, and it will take an additional 50 people over the course of that 8 years to get this done. So let's move on to what most people think of when we are building a museum, which is the building and the exhibits. So we hired the exhibit designers, the architects, and our construction management firm at the same time back in 2021. And we did this the first thing we did to kick off that design plan was to take a 7-day, 28-stop trip across Wisconsin. We did that for 3 reasons. The first was we have some of our designers come from out of town. We wanted to make sure that they understood Wisconsin's natural and cultural wonders. The second thing was we were bringing those three teams together at one time so that when designing the museum, the exhibits and the building worked together. And thirdly, we brought them together on a 7-day trip so that we could gel as a team, because we knew that as we moved through this process, there were going to be times when we would have very candid, difficult conversations to have, and we knew we needed to trust each other. Right, Brian? We needed to have candid conversations and make tough decisions. So we brought them together, and in general, a building process and the exhibit process are the same in that they have, in general, 5 steps to that process. So that process starts with conceptual design, but I just want to remind you that at every step in this process, we have been reaching out in the community, getting input on what we've done, changing what we're doing based on that input. So we start into conceptual design, and that has the least amount of detail in it. It describes the concepts and the general layout of how that vision is going to be accomplished in this museum. What will the building look like? How many spaces will there be for exhibits versus collections? Where are they going to be located? It's a general overview of the building. Then we move on to schematic design, which puts more detail into this design process. So we get drawings and other documents that start to show scale and relationships. What are the exhibit themes going to be in this new museum? What are the objects that we're going to be using? How many office spaces are there and where are they? How much space is there for collections and research labs? And where are they? And what kind of visitor amenities will we have? In addition, this is when we do those preliminary cost estimates to make sure that we are on track. Then we move into design development, and that puts even more detail. Detailed drawings, what kinds of materials are we going to use? How many doors are going to be? How many toilets are there going to be in this? So it's putting more and more detail onto this. And this is where we are right now. We are in the middle of design development. The next step after design development will be construction drawings, and then we go out for bid, and then we start into that construction. We are on track to break ground early next year, and that would put us at opening in late 26, early 27. So I said in general, the exhibit and architecture process follow the same thing, but the same process. But in fact, exhibits have a few more steps in this. So with the exhibits, prior to conceptual design, we actually had to do a process of coming up with the storylines and themes for the new museum. And so we brought the community together, and these are the 5 storylines and themes for that new museum. They are not galleries unto themselves. They are actually the storylines and themes that will be woven through each of those galleries. The other thing is, between design development and the construction drawings, we actually start to hone in on the exact stories that we're going to be telling for each of these cases, each of these exhibits. So, and then on top of that, in addition to that, what we are doing is we have existing exhibits in the museum right now. And to honor those exhibits, we, through every step in this process, have been looking at, as we hone in and get a little more clarity as to what we are doing in the new museum, we start to look at the current exhibits and bring them over into the new galleries and make sure that we are repurposing as much of what is in the current exhibit in the new in the new museum. In addition, I said that one of our relevancy things was that we were going to be telling the stories from the voices of the community in which those stories come from. We have been working not only across Wisconsin, but across the world with source communities. So for the past several years, we've been working with Wisconsin tribes to make sure the stories we tell come from their voices. We've also been working with the Sami up in Northern Europe, with the Hopi in the Southwest, with the Ainu in Japan, with Quechua in Brazil. We've been working with people from the South Pacific, from Kenya and Uganda. So we have been reaching out across the world to make sure that those stories are shared from the perspectives of those people. Now, once the building is built and commissioned, only then can we actually start to install exhibits and to bring collections over. So this is fair warning. That building's gonna look like we should be open, and there's still gonna be a lot going on inside. So at the end of all of this exhibit process, we're gonna still have props and cases and shelves of exhibits that won't make it over to the new museum. That we will be bringing all collection items, but props, we're gonna have to figure out what do we do with these. So we still have a lot of planning to do and a lot of work to do on this. So the exhibit process is a little bit different than what you might expect. Is the building process different than building just any building in this community? Of course it is, because we have collections, and those collections have to be, the conditions that they need to be in are different than what you might find in a regular office building. So we have specimens and alcohol. They have very strict fire requirements and fire suppression requirements. We have metal objects, we have wooden objects. All of these have special conditions, and so that HVAC has to be a premium HVAC to handle all of these. In addition, we're building what we call a 5-story building, but each of those exhibit floors is 26-foot ceilings. So this is more like an 8 or 9-story building, but we also are bringing the exhibits up, the collections up off of the exhibit floors. And we can't have 26-foot ceilings in a collection space because you can't get up 26 feet. So our designers actually did something very creative and put our 3 floors of collections into 2 floors of exhibits. If you look at this building, we get the question all the time, why aren't there very many windows in this? Why can't you have more windows? Well, in fact, window and light is very detrimental to collections. And also, you asked us to do an immersive experience. You create that immersion through lighting, through a lot of it's done through lighting. And therefore, if you have light coming in at different lighting at different times of the day, you now have destroyed your immersive experience. And finally, in the building, we have a lot of heavy things. And so floor loading has to be taken into account for this, because we certainly don't want something happening with these collections. So floor loading is a big thing. And then finally, we have butterflies, live butterflies, which are regulated by USDA and have very stringent requirements. So again, we have to take into account in this building the conditions that we need for live butterflies. And finally, how does all of this happen? Well, when it comes down to it, it happens because of money. And so back in 2017, we did a feasibility study. And based on that, we knew that this project needed to be a public-private partnership, with the public funding coming first. So it is a $240 million project, the largest cultural project in the state of Wisconsin to date. We have divided that up into $90 million in public funding. We secured $40 million 2 years ago from the state. We secured $45 million last year in March from the county, and we kicked off our capital campaign in July. The last time I reported, which was a couple of months ago, we were all in at this point at 128 million. I'm not prepared to tell you where we are now, but we have made progress, and I hope that we will be announcing our new number in the coming month or so. But this does take it takes the community to make this happen. And finally, this has all been playing out in the public eye. If there are reporters in the room, I know that you're going to ask me lots of questions, and some of them I won't be able to answer yet. But this is playing out in the public eye. So how do we manage this? Well, we have partnered with Miller Communication, and they, along with our amazing marketing team, have scoped out a plan to keep the community engaged throughout this whole process. And we've also, as a team, become very adept at anticipating where issues may arise and at navigating public opinion, which you can imagine there's a lot of public opinion out there. So where are we now? We are about halfway through this project, a little more than halfway. And the reason why I'm sharing all of this with you is because I'm going to ask all of you to be our ambassadors. We are going to be, this is a long project, and there are going to be periods of this project where it looks like nothing is progressing, and you're going to start to wonder, well, is this really going to come to be? And I just want you to be able to share with people that this is a long, complicated project, and to assure them that, in fact, this thing will come to fruition. And we all know that sometimes good things come. And good things are worth waiting for. So thank you so much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Good, thank you. Being involved in real estate and development, how did you source out your architect and your designer, obviously specialty, and also the moving company? How do you source those out, or where did you go? Where are they coming from?
So we put out an RFP for both the architects and the exhibit designers, as well as construction management, and went through the whole RFP process. So we put it out to those communities of architects that do museum buildings. And we had, for architects, there were a lot of architects who paired up and submitted proposals, and we had somewhere around 120 architects who put in for this project. So, you know, building a natural history or any museum in a community is a big thing. And so architects were very interested in this.
I hope you'll allow a question not directly related to the project, but you did mention a couple of times having collections of ancient artifacts and artifacts from all over the world. Given the current issues and discussion around repatriation of artifacts, is that an issue for parts of the museum's collection?
I guess I wouldn't call it an issue. We have been repatriating materials since the 90s. So there is within the US, there is a process that you go through, and we've been working with the tribes since the 90s to return the objects that are sacred and burial objects. And we've also been working with, we returned an ancestor to the Maoris. So when people reach out, we always consider that, and we go through the process.
Hi, thanks for being here. It'll be easy to be an ambassador for this project, for sure. But when you're talking about $240 million, there's a lot of other uses for that money. So my question is there a particular, what's the biggest competitor as you go compete for that money? Is there another project? Is there an attitude, et cetera, that you're coming up against that is a hurdle for you?
I think our hurdle we've gotten over. Our hurdle was when we headed into this project, this is probably before we went into the campaign, you're supposed to be in a quiet phase right now. We are in the loudest quiet campaign probably in the history of quiet campaigns, because we are such a public institution and because for so many years we have needed this new building. The other reason for that new building is because we were going to lose accreditation. We had gone through accreditation in the early 2000s, and they said if you don't do something about that building, we're going to have to take accreditation away. 10 years later, the building was worse. So we headed into this without any visuals, without knowing what the building was going to look like, without knowing what the exhibits were going to be. And we had to start to sell this to people. So we went to our closest donors and asked them to support it as we headed into this. Now that we have revealed the building, what it's going to look like, the exhibits, people are really getting excited. There's always going to be campaigns in a community. But the thing you should know is we're not just coming to this community. We are going across the state. We have visitors that come. We get about 500,000 visitors every year. We get visitors from every single state, county in this state. We get them from across the states. Those collections come from every single county in this state. So we were able to show the state itself that the state government that we were worthy of their money, and we are actually taking our campaign out across the state. So we've already received funding from up in the Fox Valley. We're working in Madison. So it's a broader campaign than just in Milwaukee and the surrounding areas. Did I answer your question?
Pretty much. I think you said at the beginning you were your own impediment and that you weren't really ready for prime time. It got loud before you figured, and now that it is loud, it's, I don't want to say an easy sell, but
it's much easier.
Much easier, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for an incredible presentation. If I was a young aspiring museum curator, I'd want to work for you. So, which I think is a value proposition. I can imagine a lot of people across the United States would want to work for you and your vision. I'm a Madison creature, and so I moved back to Milwaukee, and so I commend you for getting $40 million from Madison. I think that's just amazing. And also commend your culture and nature connection. Coming from the DNR, too often culture is separated from nature, especially for the underserved community. And coming from spearfishing duty between northern Wisconsin, Native Americans, and Caucasians, I see what happens when there's not understanding. So my question for you is whether you see opportunity on the culture connection, using the museum and the shared experiences and the shared narratives as a way of bridging cultures in the city and between the city and non-city, if you will.
I think that absolutely. I think what we want to share is that that when we look at cultures, if you look at what we've done with what we're calling Living in a Dynamic World, which is our exhibit that is talking about both the natural world and cultures from across the world, we've defined that as certain ecosystems that we're looking at, and then we're starting to say, okay, let's say mountains. What is it about mountains that help to shape cultures? What is it? Where are the differences? Where are the similarities? And what we want to do in this is really to start to evoke those questions, to start to ask, what are the similarities? What are the differences? Why do we do things this way? Why does everybody do this way in certain ecosystems? And why is it different? So we do want to start to have people think about why do things happen the way they happen?
Could you tell us what you think the actual value of the collections are?
No.
Well, I mean, we talk about 240 million as being a big number, but my guess is that the collections are worth that.
Oh, they're worth more than that. I mean, they're invaluable in that, if we think about, you could put a value on some of the cultural objects because on the open market, they have a value. But if you think about natural history items, it's something that was collected at a certain point in time in the past that can never ever be collected again. And many times those areas where they were collected are no longer there. They are paved over by a parking lot, and so it is the natural history of this state and the country over time, through time, and the only way that we can really understand the natural world is by studying these collections from the past and using them to understand the present. So in many ways, they are invaluable.
Yeah, because then there was never any option of not doing this.
No.
Thank you again for being here today. Having toured the Museum of Natural History in New York a couple of times, I think it's the Ackley Wing where they have major collections of families of animals, giraffes and zebras and rhinoceros and polar bears and everything, baby animals, and it's wonderful to see these until you think about the fact that each one of these baby animals had to be captured and killed. Not a popular thing probably to do today.
No, and three things actually. One, the way we collect today is very different than the way we collected in the past. But I would also say that because we have these collections from the past, we actually understand more about what's going on in the world today. Two, you said the Akeley Hall. Well, Akeley got his start here. So Carl Akeley, he, back in the 1890s, actually created the very first diorama. He then went on to the Field Museum, and then he went out to New York. And so there is the Akeley Hall of Mammals, and everybody thinks of Akeley as New York's Akeley, but he started here, and that diorama is still on exhibit now. It is a small muskrat diorama, and it is the first time that anybody put animals into a habitat, and actually it's the first time that you actually understood and it taught you more. So that he comes right back to Milwaukee, and that's the other thing that I want to share with you, because I have worked at museums around the world, around the country, not around the world. Milwaukee should be really proud because, number one, we have, this museum dates back to the 1882. We have museums that a lot of other communities don't have, and we have the history of museums. And we all grew up with these museums thinking that's what every other community in the United States grew up with. They didn't. And so we are a real museum visiting community, and that is unlike not every other, but most other communities in this country. So we should be proud that we were actually on the cutting edge when we were bringing this museum into being back in 1882. And now, of course, it's our opportunity to keep that tradition moving. So, did I answer your question?
Hi, Ellen.
Hi.
It's always a pleasure to see you. And I don't have a question, but I did want to share with the room. I know some people, one of the earlier questions said, it's easy to now be a steward of this institution. I have been with you at moments when it hasn't been so easy. And I wanted to share with this room that she really has stood the post in advocating for Wisconsin's rich history, and this museum in particular, and has stood the post despite sometimes very difficult moments in trying to move this through the difficult process when you have such a widely known and beloved cultural institution. So I just wanted to say, from the bottom of my heart, Ellen, I really, really thank you for doing that and for being such a humble person as you went through that process, because I think had it maybe been someone else, we wouldn't be seeing where we are today. So our thanks to you, Ellen, for putting up with it.
Wow. And the one comment I want to make is that this is not me, this is a team. I mean, nothing is ever done by one person, but we have an amazing team at the museum who is really bringing this forward. We have an amazing team of designers and even the construction management. I have to get it, Brian.
You mentioned that the current building is owned by the county, and I think I saw flashed on the screen that the future building will not be owned by the county.
Correct.
So my questions are, and I'm embarrassed to say, I don't know who owns the museum if not just the building. Is it the county?
So the museum is a separate 501c3. So we have a little bit of history here. We started in 1882. It was actually an act of the Wisconsin government that brought us into being, but we were brought into being as a city museum. And then in the 1976, well, prior to 76, the city said we serve more than the city, and it should be either a state or a county museum. So the museum entered into those discussions. It was determined that the county would take over the museum, and actually the city sold the museum to the county for $10 million in 1976. Then in 1992, we all know that county funding has always been on this roller coaster, and most of it going down, down, down. And in 1992, it became very clear that the museum could not exist as being just a county museum. And so it needed to have do fundraising, and being part of the county, that was, hands were tied. So in 1992, we separated from the county and became a separate 501c3, but the county still owns those collections, so they are held in trust for all of you, and the county owns the building we're in. The new building will be owned by the museum, but the county will still own the collections.
You answered my follow-up question.
Thank you for being here today. I just wanted to say how much I have always loved the museum from when I was a little kid in Milwaukee, and now I love taking my own children to the museum, especially in the middle of winter when there's not that much to do. I'm curious whether there will be a time when the old museum is closed before the new one opens, or if visitors will be able to come and see it maybe in a limited capacity.
So we are still planning that, and yes, there likely will be a period of time when both the old museum is closed and we haven't yet opened the new. We are planning to make that as short as possible, but that will depend on how we stage things coming out of our current exhibits and going into the new building. But we will keep it open as long as we can and make sure that I know we have people showing up every day saying, when are you closing? I've got to come in and visit the museum one last time. We'll have lots of one last times for you to come and visit. And we will make it very clear when we are closing down. But we want to make sure that everybody experiences this all the way up till we move over into that new museum.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm curious, perhaps it's too early, but have you given consideration to cost of admission? And what are you thinking in terms of making sure that the museum will be accessible to the most amount of people possible?
Yeah, it's a little early for actual admission rates, but we are committed to making sure it is accessible. And we have committed to the county that we will retain our free days for everybody. We also work with, right now, we have been getting funding from Kohl's to make sure that we have a free day. They're supporting that. So we will continue to do that to make sure that it is a museum that is accessible to everyone. All right. Thank you.